Hey guys, welcome back to Falcon Central Radio on the Pro Football Central Radio Network. I'm one of your hosts, Aaron Freeman, joined by my good friend Scott Karasik. We are back this week to talk about the Falcons' playoff win over the Seattle Seahawks. We'll preview their upcoming NFC Championship game matchup against the Green Bay Packers. And as usual, we'll answer your mailbag questions. We also have to talk a little bit about a roster move that they made earlier today. We'll talk about the reports about Kyle Shanahan's potential future out west. And we'll also be talking with later on Brian Poole, the Falcons cornerback. So we'll have a little bit of a condensed show tonight, guys, just because we're going to have to duck out in an hour to talk with Brian Poole. Unfortunately, we won't be able to air that interview live, but it will certainly be up on the website at Pro Football Central and on iTunes either later tonight or definitely tomorrow. So we apologize for anybody who was tuning in hoping they would catch a glimpse of Brian Poole, but we will still talk plenty of Falcons football in the meantime, and you guys can listen to our conversation with him later tonight or tomorrow, and we'll tweet out those links and whatnot. So, Scott, as usual, we'll start the show off talking a little bit about the roster move. Obviously, the big news was Adrian Claiborne going on IR. We knew this move was coming, but the Falcons wound up signing Joe Villano, who's spent like the last half of the season on the practice squad. Jimmy Staton, I think, was signed to replace Villano. Probably not. Villano's going to make some massive impact in the NFC Championship game, but what do the Falcons lose with Claiborne going to IR?
I don't really think they lose as much as we've been letting on. Claiborne had that knee injury. He was dealing with other issues, and he didn't look like himself against the Seahawks for that one drive he was in. And he didn't look like himself really the last 2 weeks of the season. I think they're better off now that I hate to say it this way because I like Adrian Claiborne, but I think they might be better off playing Rashid Hageman and Brooks Reed in the snaps that Claiborne was playing, just because those guys are fresher, those guys are healthier, and those guys seem to be hitting their stride this season, at least this point in the season. And I think that's what you want. And I know that it sucks to lose Claiborne, but I do think the Falcons have the guys that can replace him. I think if you play more Reed in those spots that Claiborne was playing defensive end, it's not going to hurt your defense because he showed out this week. He looks like he's finally figured it out in Atlanta. I think if you play more of Ben Garland and where Claiborne was playing defensive tackle, you'd be okay. I think if you play more Rashid Hageman in the base and play Babineau where Claiborne was playing in the nickel, you'd be okay. I just don't think that you absolutely need Adrian Claiborne. I thought Babineau was out playing in the last part of the season anyway. So I'd rather have Babineau, who's fresh from only playing 30% of the snaps this year, than Claiborne, who'd played damn near 60 when he was healthy each game and injured most of the season. I mean, give me the guy who's healthy and fresh versus the guy who's not healthy at all. And I think Villano is going to be inactive.
Okay. Yeah, I can't really disagree with anything you said. I guess the only point I would make, the only counter I would make to that is Claiborne was the most effective pass rusher the Falcons had in that previous matchup against the Green Bay Packers. I agree with you. He hasn't looked like the same player these last couple of weeks, and certainly during that time when he was hurt since that game. But if you're operating under the premise that Claiborne's the only pass rusher we have that can sort of win his individual matchups against the Packers offensive line, even if he's not that guy, that does not speak particularly well to this upcoming week's matchup. But, I don't know if that's true. I do feel like the Falcons can sort of hopefully generate a little bit better pressure from some of the other players and stepping up this week. You're right with Babineau playing. It certainly has been much better down the stretch. than Claiborne has been. So, we'll see what happens. But, given this week's matchup, given the importance of the pass rush, even if Claiborne was diminished, it does hurt you a little bit to not have all the weapons in terms of your pass rush arsenal that you could possibly have. Let's talk about Kyle Shanahan. Now, I haven't checked Twitter in the last hour or so, but as of like 6, 7 o'clock, it seemed like the multiple guys like Adam Schefter and Ian Rappaport and even everybody's favorite Jason La Canfora were saying that Shanahan is likely to land in San Francisco. They're prepared to interview him a second time after this upcoming Falcons game. Basically, regardless of the outcome of the game, it really won't change that situation, because if the Falcons lose, then the 49ers will be free to hire Shanahan. If the Falcons win, then the Falcons are going to the Super Bowl, and there'll be 2 weeks off, and the 49ers will basically be free to basically say, you're our guy as soon as the Super Bowl's over. So it does seem like all the signs are pointing to Shanahan taking the job. I haven't seen anything that officially says that Shanahan's going to accept their offer, but it does seem like. Do you agree with that, Scott?
I don't know. I mean, I think the fact that there's no reports on whether Shanahan's like yes or no means that even he is still weighing it in. Even he's going, you know what? Maybe this isn't the job that makes sense for me. Maybe Indianapolis next year. Maybe Detroit next year. I don't know if this is the right job for me. And maybe he looks at that and goes, you know what? You know how much damage I could do with Andrew Luck versus, you know what? You know how much damage I could do with Deshaun Watson? Don't get me wrong. I like Deshaun Watson. I think he's a top 5 pick in this year's draft. I think he's a top 5 talent in any draft. I think he's got potential to be a top 10 quarterback in the league, the same way as like a taller Russell Wilson. Do I think that he is going to be better than Andrew Luck with Kyle Shanahan coaching him? No. Do I think that Kyle Shanahan could make that offensive line work in Indianapolis? I definitely do. They've got athleticism. They've got Ryan Kelly at center, who just, from my experience watching him, is like a younger Alex Mack. I like Harrison at guard. They need a right guard because good is awful. I don't really mind Joe Haig at right tackle for them, especially in the scheme. And I like Costanzo as the left tackle. They really just need a right guard over there. And I think Shanahan could really do work with that offense, with that offensive line. He had Moncrief and Hilton and Dorsett running the same kind of routes he has Julio Jones, Taylor Gabriel, and Mohamed Sanu running. And Moncrief is a better football player than Sanu and a better athlete than Sanu. He'd have tight ends to work with in Allen and Doyle. He wouldn't have to worry about trying to incorporate a fullback because, honestly, I don't think he loves the idea of incorporating a fullback. He'd have one of the best young quarterbacks in the NFL, in Andrew Luck. He'd have a running game that he can manufacture a running game. So I'm not really worried about that. He's got guys who can fit with the zone scheme, and Frank Gore's probably going to retire at that point. But, I mean, you've got the talent there. My question for him would be, do I want to work in San Francisco? I know there's a ton of cap room to work with. I don't really like Garnett in the scheme as a guard. I think he'd have to move to tackle. I think they would absolutely need a center. Beatles is garbage. Joe Staley's good, but he's like 32, 33 years old. I mean, you'd have to completely redo that offensive line. You'd have to completely redo that receiving core. You'd have to completely find a brand new quarterback because Kaepernick you're going to just get rid of. You've got kind of one tight end in Garrett Selleck and Vance McDonald. I think combined they're tight end. Carlos Hyde is solid. That defense is aging at this point and has just questions all over it. I mean, and injuries and questions all over it. There's just not enough. There's a reason why the 49ers are picking second overall. And it's because they suck and because they don't have the talent there needed to succeed. I can count maybe 4 guys on that entire roster that would maybe start, but would definitely be in a rotation in Atlanta who are starting for them. And then the rest are worse. Like Joe Staley, he wouldn't start at left tackle in Atlanta. He'd probably start at right tackle over Schrader. But like he's a good player. I know Aaron's probably like, well, he might start over Matthews in his head right now. But that's one guy out of the entire roster that's like, okay, maybe him. But then you've got DeForest Buckner, who I think would be in a rotation in Atlanta. He'd probably start over Tyson Jackson, but he'd play Tyson Jackson's role. He wouldn't really play much in the nickel unless he moved down to the 1. I think Eric Armstead's the same kind of player. I don't really think there's anybody else on that line. Ahmad Brooks would probably start over Phillip Wheeler at the strong side linebacker spot, but, I mean, that's a rotational spot in this defense. I mean, if you look at Aaron Lynch would be a Leo, but would he really be above Brooks Reed with his play this year? I don't know. I don't think he's been that good this year. I like Lynch. I just don't think he's really been effective. And then they've got a bunch of talent that is in the secondary that has looked like shit there. So I don't see like maybe Jimmy Ward could play free safety over Ricardo Allen if he like learned how to play the position properly again. Maybe Eric Reed would be the one guy. There you go. Outside of Joe Staley. They're one guy on defense that I would take and be like, yeah, that guy's going to start. It'd be Eric Reed. There's just not talent on that 49ers roster to work with. They're a 2 to 3 year rebuild at minimum right now.
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement. I don't disagree with you that Atlanta's much more talented than San Francisco. I don't disagree with you that Indianapolis would be a better job than San Francisco. But the reality in the NFL is, you can't just count on opportunities. Indianapolis was 8-8 this year. If they win 1 or 2 more games, they're NFC South playoff division winner, possible playoff contender, and they're not going to fire their coach if they go to the playoffs next year. So hoping that you get this golden opportunity to work with Andrew Luck as opposed to taking this opportunity in San Francisco isn't really a smart gamble. I don't disagree with anybody that thinks the San Francisco job is a bad job, but at the same time, if I'm playing devil's advocate in the case of Kyle Shanahan, you probably, I don't know for a fact if this is true, but he probably knows Jed York, personally, because they were both, like in middle school when Mike Shanahan was the offensive coordinator in San Francisco and John York was the owner of the 49ers. So he probably, that I think the biggest deterrent against San Francisco is their situation. But if he has a personal relationship with Jed York, which is possible, given their proximity in age, they're basically the same age, and they were both around the organization in the early and mid 90s, then I don't see that as a huge deterrent that it would be for someone else who doesn't have that relationship. They have the number 2 pick in the draft. Even if you're not taking a quarterback there, if say Cleveland takes a quarterback, you got Myles Garrett. So like that's a good thing to work with.
True.
If you really like one of these quarterbacks, you take them. You got $90 million in cap space. So a lot of these talent deficiencies, you can really sort of go hard in free agency. And with the cachet that you have coming off of this season in Atlanta, you can probably lure a couple of more free agents to San Francisco than you probably normally would be able to do on a 2-14 team. Like Jacksonville, where they have to overpay players. So I think that works in their favor. Obviously, they are a rebuilding team, but I think the organization realizes they're rebuild. They're not going to be in this situation they've been in the last couple of years, where they're like, oh, we have this great talent and we need to hire Sula or Kelly that's going to win with this talent that we've already assembled. I think they know it's a rebuilding process. I think Shanahan could look at it and say, I have the number 2 pick. I have $90 million in cap space. I have a lot of things and assets to work with. And over the course of the next 3 years, I can put this team in playoff contention. I wouldn't sit here and quite agree with him on that, but I wouldn't be like, you're crazy for thinking that. I mean, I think if you compare the situation currently in San Francisco versus the situation in Atlanta back in 2008, it's not that dissimilar, at least on paper. Whether Shanahan proves to handle it as well as Mike Smith did back then, that remains to be seen. But I get it if Kyle Shanahan wants to leave for San Francisco. It's not an ideal situation, but in this league, you can't just sit around hoping and waiting for the perfect situation to fall into your lap. You got to go out there and take the bull by the horns. And if he can get a couple of years under his belt and have some success in San Francisco, even if it's not a huge amount of success, then it's going to open doors for him in the future later on, more so than potentially staying here in Atlanta and just sort of riding in Dan Quinn's we got some mailbag questions in particular pertaining to the Shanahan departure potentially. Vienna Falcons asks, if Shanahan leaves for San Francisco and Quinn grants him one assistant like Carroll did, does he take Raheem Morris with him?
I think Quinn will be like, hey, you can take an assistant with you. But you notice who Dan Quinn took was Chris Morgan, the offensive line coach. If Dan Quinn lets Kyle Shanahan take an assistant with him, he should let him take someone who, one, isn't one of his best friends like Raheem Morris is, and two, isn't Wade Harmon. Outside of that, let him take anybody. Let him take Jerome Henderson. Let him take Ulbrich. Let him take Marquand Manuel. Marquand Manuel deserves to have a defensive coordinator job. And I think just based on what he's done with the Falcons secondary the past couple of years, and I think he would do great as a defensive coordinator. Let him take Mike McDaniel or Matt LaFleur. But don't let him just walk off into the sunset with arguably the guy who made him look good this year. And that's Raheem Morris. I know Aaron's probably like, well, I don't know how Raheem Morris would have done that. But I think Raheem Morris, on the offensive side of the ball, as the wide receivers coach, has kind of been that bridge between Shanahan and the offensive players that was needed. And he needs that same kind of bridge to bring with him. And it might be Brian Cox as an assistant head coach. It might be Marquand Manuel as an assistant head coach. Because I don't see Shanahan as the fire him up kind of guy. I see him as more of a dry kind of guy, the way that Bill Belichick is. Belichick doesn't inspire confidence with his speeches. Belichick inspires confidence the way a drill sergeant does. You don't want to fuck up because you know he's going to be on your ass and you know he's going to kill you. So you got the two different kinds of ways that work. You can either be a player's coach or you can be a CEO, I don't see Shanahan as the motivator, is all I'm saying. I see him as a calculator.
Okay. We'll see. I don't want to sit here and pretend to know what type of a head coach Kyle Shanahan will be because I don't know. I would be shocked if Raheem Morris left Atlanta to go to San Francisco. Question. Raheem Morris and Dan Quinn have a 20, if not 25-year friendship of working together. They both were at Hofstra together when Morris was a player and Dan Quinn was like a graduate assistant. So I would be very surprised if Raheem Morris was like, yeah, I'm going to San Francisco with Kyle Shanahan, this guy who, I never worked with until, really this year. As for whether Raheem Morris is responsible for Shanahan's success, evidence to support that, but maybe, I don't know. I would expect Shanahan to take one of the offensive assistants, probably not Harmon, but, maybe Mike McDaniel, who's been rumored to be the in-house choice to be the offensive coordinator replacing Shanahan. Maybe Chris Morgan, because they work together in Washington. Maybe Bobby Turner. But pretty much any of those offensive assistant coaches, probably with Morris and Harmon being the least likely, probably none of the defensive coaches.
If I had to pick, I think it'd be Bobby Turner. I think that would be the guy who would go with them.
Yeah, I mean, they have the longest working relationship because Bobby Turner was always an assistant on his dad's coaching staffs back in Denver and Washington. So it makes sense. If he was only allowed to cherry pick one guy, Bobby Turner would potentially be that guy. But see how it goes. I don't have a good enough grasp of how it's going to go to make any sort of strong predictions. It's a month ago when people were asking, do you think Kyle Shanahan is going to leave? It's like, maybe, so we'll see how it plays out. Luke at the Dirty Bird 1998 asks, most valuable person in 2016, Matt Ryan or Kyle Shanahan?
Ryan. By far Ryan, because while Kyle Shanahan draws up the plays, Matt Ryan is the guy who's actually going out there and executing them. And I think as long as you keep the same kind of offense, that zone blocking scheme, that total package when it comes to the passing game, you'll be okay. That's why I want to see a guy like Rick Dennison or Greg Knapp come in, because I think those two guys, or bring both guys in and let them take Matt LaFleur and another one of his choice to Denver with him, or to San Francisco with him, and let those two guys run the offense, because it's going to be the exact same offense that they've run this year.
Yeah, I mean, I got to go with Ryan just because, as Scott said, he executes the plays. You can draw up a perfect play, but if you don't have guys that can execute them, every throw that Matt Ryan's made, it hasn't been pre-decided for him by Kyle Shanahan. He's not a robot out there, and Kyle Shanahan's pulling the strings. I certainly think Kyle Shanahan deserves a ton of credit for the success of the Falcons offense this year, but I do think ultimately at the end of the day, it rests on Matt Ryan's shoulders to get the job done. And I would say he's the most valuable person. I think we answered Luke's other question about what Shanahan could possibly have interested in San Francisco. So I think we'll skip that unless you got something else you want to add, Scott.
No, I mean, other than go bring Dennison in.
All right. Let's talk about this Seahawks game. Very impressive performance by the Falcons offense. Decent performance by the defense, if I say so myself. I think the Falcons were able to win the majority of the matchups that they were presented with. It's a little touch and go at the beginning of the game, I thought, with sort of how well the Seahawks executed that first drive, and then were able to sort of get a big play on that second drive, and then had the big punt return. But fortunately, that second drive, they wound up settling for a field goal instead of getting the 7 points, thanks to a sack by Brooks Reed on a pass protection breakdown by the Seahawks. And that big punt return by Devin Hester resulted in a penalty. Holding penalty, more penalties were called on, could have been called on that play. Brought it back, and the Falcons proceeded to get a safety, and then from that point on, just basically took over the game and never really looked back. I think the running game was very effective. The running backs had 102 yards on 29 carries. That's a huge number considering the quality of Seattle's run defense. The defensive line was really effective at getting pressure on Russell Wilson. According to Pro Football Focus, they got pressure on him on 18 of 39 dropbacks. They were very effective at using stunts to completely obliterate Seattle's very inept and inexperienced offensive line. The offensive line held up extremely well against the Seahawks pass rush. Yeah, they gave up 3 sacks. Yeah, they gave up 8 hits. But that's a big improvement from the last time they played, where it was 14 hits. Ryan was only pressured on 10 of his 40 dropbacks. And, the offensive line obviously created opportunities and holes in the running game. I thought our interior line played about as well as they've played all season, considering the high level of competition that they faced in Seattle's defensive line. And obviously our receivers, as they have done pretty much every week, really took advantage of some mismatches in the secondary, with Ryan being able to spread the ball around to, 8 different receivers. And
Yeah,
it
that
seemed
was
like
fun.
everybody, not everybody had a big play, but everybody had a key catch that either set up a score or something like that. So it was as
And two
dynamic
other
and
guys dropped it.
as productive an offensive performance we've seen this season for the Falcons.
Yeah, and two other guys dropped the ball.
Yeah.
Aldrich and Patrick DeMarco both had drops, which yeah. No, I was very impressed with the defense more than anything else. The fact that they held this team to just really 13 points, if we're being honest here, was amazing. That garbage time touchdown to Doug Baldwin, I'm not really counting because 36-13 when it happened. And then they just intercepted Wilson right before it, and then they intercepted him after it. And Aaron, get ready. It's coming. I was wrong about Ricardo Allen.
Ooh, interesting.
So I went back because I'm that kind of guy and watched every game this year, just focusing on him. Now, I was right in that he was trying to do a little too much to cover for the guys fucking up early in the season. Before the bye, he was definitely trying to do too much in terms of covering for Keanu, covering for Deion Jones, covering for Devondre Campbell, and some of the mistakes that they were making. After the bye, they weren't making those mistakes anymore. So he could stay in his lane and he can make the plays. Because they seemed to understand when he was making a signal what the hell to do. Before the bye, they had no idea. It's like they spent the bye actually working and figuring out, like, hey, when I make this signal, do that and don't fuck it up. And that's what you need. So do I think Ricardo Allen can be improved upon still? Yes. But you need a guy who's like running a 4.4 and like Eric Berry coming out of college. Not Eric Berry now.
Okay. Yeah, look, I don't disagree with that statement. I've never been one of those people that doesn't believe that Ricardo Allen is upgradable. I was literally saying that, in November of 2015. So it's not as if that idea, but I do feel, differently that his play all season long, I think, has been at this level. I just think now, because, people are saying that the defense is coming together, they're not as quick to find a scapegoat for the defensive problems. And I think Ricardo Allen was too often the scapegoat for that, when I don't think he was anywhere close to the biggest issue on this defense. I think he played well. I think some other standouts on the defense. I thought Babineau had his best game of the year. I thought Brooks Reed had his best game of the year. I don't quite agree, Scott, that the defense was all that, but I think they did enough, which is basically what they always have to do. And they seem to get, at least from my perspective, a ton of credit for just doing, some of the work of the heavy lifting for the Falcons to win games. But they made some plays, particularly in the second half of the game. I thought there was a couple of opportunities that Seattle had that messed up, as opposed to the defense really stopped them. But that's no use crying over spilt milk. So I'll give
Seattle's
the defense
5 second half drives. They had 1 field goal, 1 touchdown, 2 picks, and a punt.
Yeah, I mean, when you put it that way, it looks amazing. But I would argue that the reason why they had a field goal was because Wilson missed the wide open Doug Baldwin in the end zone. And the reason why they had to punt later on was because Wilson missed a wide open Doug Baldwin who got behind the defense. So I don't feel like that's, a sign that the defense did their job. I just think Wilson missed a couple of throws, and that cost Seattle 11 points in the second half.
I look at that as a team defense that basically said, hey, if you want to take this half-court three-point shot, go for it. That's the shot you can try and take.
Okay, that's an interesting analogy.
And he tried to take the half-court three-point shot, and he missed. The guy was open 60 yards down the field, and he missed him. He overthrew his guy.
Okay.
It happens. It's a low percentage throw is what I'm saying. It is. A throw that far down the field is a very low percentage throw.
Maybe to the average NFL quarterback.
Well, especially maybe to the guy who's getting jammed at the line too.
Okay. It's an interesting take. It sounds like you're praising the defense for letting Doug Baldwin be wide open 40 yards down the field. That doesn't make any sense to me, but if that's the route you want to take, then by all means take it. As for the things that didn't stand out, I thought Jake Matthews had some struggles. I think he's still dealing with some injury issues, lingering issues. We'll see what he does against Green Bay this week. We'll be seeing Nick Perry and Clay Matthews quite a bit. So I think he can win those matchups, but it is a concern that he was getting beat a little bit more than my liking by Bennett and Clark early in the game. I thought his game picked up as the game wore on, but that's just not to criticize Jake, but it's just something to keep an eye on coming game, because that could matter. And obviously the special teams was not quite up to par. Other than those two things, not a whole lot for me to nitpick, other than saying the defense might not be coming together. But overall, a really outstanding performance by the Falcons. Not perfect, and certainly they deserve most of the praise that they're getting this week. Let's move on. Let's talk about this Packers game. Obviously, the most important game of the season, because it's one game away from the Super Bowl. Falcons did manage to beat the Packers in Week 8 by 1 point, thanks to some last-minute heroics by the great. The interesting thing with this upcoming matchup is going to be some of the injuries that the Packers are dealing with. Now, several players that did not play in that earlier matchup will probably play this week. You have guys like Cobb, Jared Cook, Clay Matthews, among other prominent players. We'll see whether or not Green Bay getting some of those guys back is going to make a huge difference for them. They are potentially going to lose some other pieces. Most notably, Jordy Nelson is dealing with a rib injury. Most reports are saying he's doubtful to play. At this point, I'm not expecting him to play. The other key injury seems to be Quentin Rollins, who's dealing with a concussion. He's questionable whether he gets cleared. Morgan Burnett, the safety, probably is a much bigger injury, because even if Quentin Rollins played, I don't think Green Bay's corners are going to be able to match up with the Falcons receivers regardless. But Morgan Burnett will be a key piece, just because he can sort of stabilize the middle of the field, because that's where Green Bay is pretty weak, particularly at linebacker position. And if they're going to stop the run, they're going to need him a lot. So he's dealing with a quad injury. So I think Nelson and Burnett are the two injuries to watch. Burnett's probably a little bit more on the fence. And for the Falcons, the only real injury they're dealing with is Julio. He's got the toe injury. Dan Quinn's already said that he's going to play on Sunday. He's probably not going to practice this week. It's always, since we are in the business of overanalyzing the Falcons, it's always interesting to sort of see whether or not that's because Julio is a little bit more nicked up than the team is letting on, or is it just they just want to rest him? I think the Falcons have proven that they can sort of survive even if Julio percent this season. They've basically been doing that every game, because I don't think Julio's been healthy all year long. So I don't think this injury is that big a deal. And, earlier in the season, I probably would have been freaking out a little bit more about this. But at this point in the year, I trust the offense and the coaching staff and the rest of the receivers to step up when the time comes. Speaking of guys coming back from injury, I think one of the key matchups to look forward to this week is Tevin Coleman. He did not play in that earlier matchup. I do feel like, as I mentioned earlier, with the weakness of the Packers inside linebackers and possibly no Morgan Burnett involved in the passing game could really be a huge asset for the Falcons. I think the only thing Green Bay's defense can really present that's going to challenge the Falcons, they're going to have to win up front to compensate for the fact that they just don't have what it takes in the back end of their defense to keep up with the Falcons offense. So they're going to need guys like Matthews and Peppers and Perry and Mike Daniels to play much better than they did in that first matchup. And then, we've seen this year where the Falcons offensive line doesn't, is struggling a little bit. You can sort of slow down this offense. And in this sort of matchup where you're Green Bay and you're basically hoping that you can outscore the Falcons, if you can sort of hold them to like 30-ish points as opposed to 40-ish points, then that's going to give you a much better chance to win this game. Be given, I don't expect the Falcons defense to do a whole lot to stop Aaron Rodgers unless the offense sort of can help them out by controlling a little bit more of the clock, by running the football and being a little bit more balanced and getting off to a fast start. But what do you think, Scott?
I'm actually agreeing with you there. Aaron Rodgers is way too fucking good. I do think the Falcons need to get pressure on Aaron Rodgers. I do think that blitzing against Aaron Rodgers is a good idea. But I also think that David Bakhtiari has an injury. And there is a true issue there that people may not be letting on. I also don't think Jordy plays. There's these articles out saying, Jordy Nelson might suck it up and play and all that. One hit from Keanu Neal and he breaks that damn rib again. I wouldn't play. I know that sounds like a pussy move, but broken ribs are no joke. They are not fun. They don't feel good. Even I had a bruised rib and I didn't feel like breathing. Like, I don't understand how these guys would go out there with broken ribs.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing you can do for it. You can literally just sit there and breathe and pray that it heals quicker.
Yeah, I don't know the technology of the flak jackets, but I do know, there is a danger with broken ribs that you can puncture a lung. So, unless, I would, obviously I'm a little biased in this, but if Jordy Nelson is not up to it, then I don't see why you would play him. And I don't expect him to be up to it. The fact that basically no one is, is basically saying that it doesn't look likely that he's going to play, that you're already seeing Packers writers saying that now, I think is probably a very long shot that he's going to play this week.
And yeah, the Falcons do need to run the ball pretty much all day. There is more than enough room to run against that Packers defense. They are not good with their run fits. They allowed, last time Atlanta played them, they allowed something like 4.7 yards per carry. And I think if Atlanta stuck to the run a little bit more, it probably would have been even higher. But they only ran the ball 19 times all game. And 2 of them were scrambles by Matt Ryan. I do think you need to, and they're going to have Tevin Coleman back. When you've got Coleman and you've got Freeman, and you can get those guys a combined 25, 30 carries, you do it. Especially against the Packers defense, that won't be able to stop it. That's been banged up. That's been injured. That has a lot of issues all around. Against the run, but against the pass. You use your matchups. And take into account that they've played an extra game, and it wasn't a fun one. It was a punishment. They got to play against the Dallas Cowboys in that offensive line, which is arguably the only line better in the NFC than Atlanta's in terms of run blocking and punishing a defensive line. And now they're going to see the same scheme again, and they're going to see it after Ezekiel Elliott just ran for, 7 yards a carry against them?
Yeah.
5.7 yards per carry. If you're sitting there and you can't stop Ezekiel Elliott, prepared for just him, basically, they had 8 guys in the box and they couldn't stop the run against Ezekiel Elliott. Now they're going to have 7 or even 6 guys in the box with Julio Jones and Taylor Gabriel out there. I know you're not a huge fan of Sanu. I think Sanu's been what he was paid for. He was slightly overpaid. Okay?
Slightly.
He probably should have made $5 million a year. He makes 7. Oh no. Or 6.25 if we're being super picky about it. He got maybe $1.5 million more per year than he should have gotten.
Okay.
And for the production we got from him this year. He was better than Roddy. He's been a good red zone threat. He's been a good receiver in those third downs when you need him. I think that's all he was supposed to be. And I know it's an overpayment. I agree it was a little bit of an overpayment. But you know what? I'm okay with it because I would rather overpay a little bit for him than pay the same amount to an aging Roddy White who can't get open. But back to my point, they're going to have 6 or 7 guys in the box versus the 8 that they were showing versus the Cowboys most of the game. They're going to get run on all day. And it's going to be very tough for them to stop the Falcons running when Atlanta can just play action it and throw deep to Julio and throw deep to Gabriel. I don't see a way that they actually stop this offense unless the Falcons stop themselves.
Okay. Yeah. I think everybody's sort of predicting this game to be a shootout. I think that's a pretty safe assumption, pretty safe prediction. I think the good thing the Falcons have is their offense is going to be in a little bit more favorable situation because they're going to be able to spread the ball around to multiple playmakers. And I think the problem that Green Bay is going to face in this game is that they're going to just basically be restricted to a couple of guys. And unfortunately, even though I do think Randall Cobb and Devontae Adams will be able to make some plays, I do think Jared Cook will be able to make some plays. I don't think any of those receivers are of the caliber that they can really take over a game to the degree that Green Bay is going to need them. I think they're more like Paul Richardson, which he can make a couple of splash plays, but he's not going to be able to carry your passing game. And so to me, like the only thing that's obviously the scary thing is Aaron Rodgers behind a really good offensive line, one of the best pass protecting offensive lines in the NFL, having an hour to throw the ball as he often found in the previous matchup. But to me, the one X factor I would say that is a little harder to predict because he didn't play in that first game, or if he played, he only played a small role, is Ty Montgomery. And the Falcons, I know, like in DVOA, they're like in the bottom 10, I think, in defensive DVOA against running backs in the passing game this year, if I'm not mistaken. I do think we have the speed with guys like Jones and Campbell to match up with Montgomery in space. But it will be interesting to sort of see if Green Bay tries to borrow a page from the Falcons with how they've used Tevin Coleman in the past to great success and try to use Montgomery out of the backfield to be a little bit more of an X factor to sort of supplement their offense. And that'll be interesting sort of to see. I wouldn't go on record predicting Montgomery to have a huge game or anything like that, but I think he could cause and create some problems. But I think, if you're building the formula for how Green Bay pulls off the win in this game, basically, they probably get out to a fast start. And sort of that's going to be their best way of sort of holding back the Falcons' rushing attack and then sort of forcing the Falcons to be a little bit more one-dimensional than they would like to be. And, then they just basically just keep putting on points. Do I think that's a likely possibility? No. But it's certainly possible, and that's why, Aaron Rodgers has been historically very, very good playing in the Georgia Dome. His passer rating in the Georgia Dome in the earlier game was like 125. I think his passer rating in every other road game this year is like 98. Obviously, we have very bad memories of some of his past performances in the Georgia Dome. So that's probably, the fear talking more so than the reality. But I think this is going to be an interesting game. It's going to be a fun game. And I think, there's a good possibility that this game could come down to the wire if Rodgers is able to get going, and you're in a position where both teams are trying to match point for point, and it might come down to who has the ball last, which was kind of the case last time. So, Green Bay had the ball last, and they couldn't score, but we'll see what happens, and should be a highly entertaining game, and hopefully the Falcons come out on top. I think they will, but we'll see what happens.
I hope they do too.
We got a couple of mailbag questions. We got a bunch of mailbag questions about this game, so we'll start off with a couple of people asked about spying Rodgers. Jonathan Moulton and Derek Collins. Jonathan's question is: you think the D can hold up without Claiborne? Will you spy Rodgers? Campbell spied last time, did he not? And Derek Collins asks: how would you game plan against Rodgers? Spying with Vic will work, but Green Bay will plan for it.
I mean, I think you have to spy Rodgers. I don't think Campbell spied. I definitely don't think it was Campbell that spied last time. I don't even think Campbell played last time. And I know Freeney was hurt. Honestly, I'm not a fan of spying quarterbacks. I think you can get up there, and if you can play contain on the edge with your ends, and if you can have defensive tackles who can shed blocks and create pressure on the interior, you don't need to spy. So I honestly wouldn't mind seeing a little bit more of Ben Garland, because I feel like he's been creating better pressure than guys in Atlanta that actually play defensive tackle sometimes. I know Aaron's laughing at me for that, but it's true.
I don't think it's a that bold a statement. I think it's, there is a kernel of truth to that, so I won't dispute it.
So, I mean, I think game planning against Rodgers, yeah, you got to spy him at times, but don't commit Deion Jones to spying. Spy with Vic every now and again. I don't think it makes sense. Honestly, I feel like you're better off game planning against Rodgers by game planning against his targets and game planning against the team around him. Like, how do you create pressure on the left side of that line against Bakhtiari and Taylor Lane? That's more of my question. How do you get around Brian Bulaga? How do you get around TJ Lang? How do you guard Jared Cook? How do you guard Randall Cobb? I don't think Jordy Nelson plays, so I'm not worried about him. How do you guard a banged up Devontae Adams? Those are the questions that you got to ask. How do you stop the running game with Ty Montgomery back there? How do you stop the runs out of the backfield with Ty Montgomery? If James Starks is healthy, how do you attack that? There's a whole group of issues that you have to make sure that you're able to stop. And the best way to play against Aaron Rodgers, the best way to beat Aaron Rodgers, is to do what the Falcons did after that first Seattle drive and win the time of possession. They held the ball for 33 of the last 52 minutes of the game. When you can do that, that's how you're going to win the game against Aaron Rodgers. It's basically the exact same way the Philadelphia Eagles beat Atlanta back in Week 10. The best way to not have an offense go off on you is to take them away and don't let them see the field. And if you can run down their throat all day with Devontae Freeman and Tevin Coleman, do it. And if you win this game 14-10 and you have 45 minutes of time of possession because all you were doing was running the ball all day, hell, if you win it 18-16, like that damn Steelers-Chiefs game, but you win it that way because you were just running the ball all day long, do it. Because
Okay.
honestly, that's all that matters is the win.
Yeah. Yeah, I do think the offense is going to give the defense a better chance to win if the offense can sort of control the clock a little bit better and more effectively than sort of sometimes where Shanahan, one of the few criticisms you give for Shanahan is sometimes he seems to be a little bit more too aggressive in trying to get those big chunk yardages and get scores quickly. But I think to answer the questions about spying Rodgers, I think this is part of the problem when comes to defending Aaron Rodgers, and that's what makes him so good. Because a big part of his success is his ability to extend plays outside the pocket, and so you do want to be able to try to contain him inside the pocket. But as obviously he's so good that just mush rushing him is not a good idea. So you're stuck in a situation where you want to try to create as much pressure as you possibly can, but at the same time you don't want him to sort of be able to buy time with his legs and be as effective as he's been, because when he's at his best, he's able to do that. You saw that last week against Dallas, where the biggest reason why Green Bay won that game was he was able to get outside the pocket, find an open Jared Cook down the field with 3 seconds left, and set up a game-winning field goal, and they won the game. If Dallas had done a better job containing him inside the pocket, maybe they win the game. So that's the difficult part of it, but it is sort of a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. Do you spy with Vic? Well, if you spy with Vic, that means you really only have 3 pass rushers going after him on a consistent basis. And Dallas really struggled when they tried to rush 3. It seemed like Green Bay was getting 40 yards a pop whenever they did that. And the Falcons have experienced that many a time in previous matchups where they rush 3 and drop 8, and Rodgers just picks it apart. So it's one of those situations where I don't know if there's a good game plan. I don't think there's any way you can sort of scheme it. I think you throw a whole bunch of stuff at him. I think you blitz. I think you spy. Sometimes you rush 3. Sometimes you rush 4. Or most of the time you probably rush 4. You throw in a heavy dose of blitz in there, and you just hope that you can sort of throw a whole bunch of junk at the wall and some of it sticks. I think that's really all you can sort of game plan. And I do think it's just got to boil down to certain guys executing, particularly on the back end. If you can trust your guys on an island, then I think you can dial up more blitzes. That was very effective for the Cowboys last week. I think the Falcons are going to have to borrow a page from them, because I just don't see them really being able to create significant pressure with just 4 guys. Maybe this is the game that Vic Beasley's sort of been lying in wait for these last couple of weeks, and he's prepared to tear Brian Bulaga a new one. Maybe Dwight Freeney's going to take advantage of a beat up David Bakhtiari. Maybe Grady Jarrett can sort of beat Corey Linsley and other interior guys, but I wouldn't bet on that. And so we'll see what the Falcons can do. We got a couple of minutes before we're going to have to duck out of here. So I think we just answered Bruce's question. We got 4 more, so let's see if we can try to answer these ones quickly. Jelani234 asks, do you expect a better running game from the Falcons in the next game?
Yes, because the Packers' defense isn't very good in terms of stopping the run.
Yeah, I think Green Bay's, I know their run defense is ranked pretty well this year, but I do think they have a much softer front than Seattle does, particularly given the big drop-off between Bobby Wagner and KJ Wright and Blake Martinez and Joe Thomas and Jake Ryan or whoever the Packers inside linebackers are. So I do think you can expect Coleman and Freeman to potentially get up in the 120, 150 yards rushing this week. Robin at 82 asks, please address the fact that our game plan is to attack and not ball control to keep Aaron Rodgers off the field.
I mean, I do think that the Falcons will attack and will attack hard all day, every day, because that's just Shanahan's style. But you do have to ball control a little bit at times. I'm not saying go crazy with the ball control the way the Smitty teams did. That's not this Falcons team. But I'm saying if you're going to score 35 points, have 5 7-minute drives because that's 35 minutes of the clock. Or maybe score 42 points and have 4 7-minute drives and a couple of quick ones. Because honestly, I don't see the need to really just hand Rodgers the ball every drive against this inexperienced defense. Now, maybe I'm right and this defense is just better than it was, and Aaron's wrong on this one. And hopefully we can hear I was wrong, Scott, because good things happen when Aaron is wrong on this show,
Generally
as we've
speaking,
noticed.
yes, that's true.
So, yeah, I'm hoping that is our game plan, is to attack and score a fuck ton of points.
Yeah, I mean, I think ideally the ideal situation is similar to the Falcons' first drive, where you had a 13-play drive that took 7 minutes, and they got 7 points at the end of it. That's what you want. Like, you want to have a bunch of those drives, or as many of those drives as you can get. Obviously, the goal isn't to do like Philadelphia did and just run, and try to keep it a 21-20, 21-17 game. That's not what, we mean by ball control, but we do mean that, don't get into this pass heavy mode, run the football. And if you're going to, mix in some short passing and use the passing game, get some screens in there, get some high percentage throws, underneath throws, get Sanu and Hardy and Gabriel and Julio involved. You don't have to be like, we need to score as many points as fast as possible sort of game plan. You want to have a balanced attack, which is attack them and play ball control. That's, the Falcons offense is capable of doing that. So it's not as if it's a either or sort of scenario. You can do both and be very effective, and I expect them to be. Jelani234 asked, do you believe the Falcons offensive line will play well against Green Bay's defensive line?
Yes, because I don't think Green Bay's defensive line is that great. Kenny Clark's okay, Guyan okay, Daniels okay. I don't see anybody who goes, oh my God, that dude's great. Like, Mike Daniels is good, but I don't think Mike Daniels is absolutely fucking great to where you're like, oh no, I don't think that he's going to end up winning, or Levitri's going to end up winning that matchup against him, or Chester's not going to end up winning that matchup. Or if he goes up against Schrader, I think Schrader would destroy him because he's got the link too. Now, I do like Mike Daniels. I think he's a solid player, but I don't think he's this destroyer that some people think. I think that he matches up well with the Falcons' offensive line, and the Falcons' offensive line can push him around because he's light in the pants. And he's their best guy.
I have a little bit more of a, I'm one of those people that thinks Mike Daniels is a destroyer, but I think the Falcons offensive line will play well against Green Bay's defensive line. Let me say that first. I do think there is a minor concern. It's probably not as big as it would have been. Played extremely well against a very good Seahawks defensive line this past week. So any concerns I might have had probably aren't to the degree that I normally would have. But Green Bay has some, really good players in their front. Matthews, Peppers, Daniels, and Perry. All of those guys. With the exception of maybe Beasley, all of those guys, and maybe Jared on his best day, and Freeney at a high level. They can present some challenges. So I know we got to duck out pretty soon, so I'll leave it at that. But I think Falcons offensive line can handle Green Bay's defensive line, but it could be problematic if things get a little bit out of hand. So last question is someone ribbing us. Is the defense coming together? We'll see. I think the defense could have a good game this week, and I'll be forced to admit that I was wrong, but we'll see how that goes.
I'm going to end it with a yes. It's starting to come together, and then we'll finally see it come together fully once they start drafting some players this offseason.
Yeah, the future's bright. Guys, we apologize for if we're rushing towards the end, but we're going to duck out soon and get to this Brian Poole energy. We appreciate all you guys that tuned in. We will definitely be back next week to talk about this matchup. And we will, if you guys want to submit your mailbag questions, use the hashtag Falcons Mailbuzz. Follow us on Twitter at Falcons PFC. I'm at FalcFans. Scott is at Karasik S. You can find us at ProFootballCentral.com and whatnot. So look for that Brian Poole interview, and it'll be up later tonight or tomorrow. So we'll see you guys next week.
Yep.